Hey there, viewers. After years of silence, Ava Baroni has finally come forward, and what she revealed about her time with Diddy in those tunnels is deeply unsettling. Her story isn't just shocking, it's the kind that changes everything. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The Air Duct File. I'm not the type of person who gets caught up in news or drama, especially when it's about some celebrity. I work in HVAC, heating, ventilation, all that. It's not glamorous, but it pays well enough. I go where they send me. That week, they sent me to Holmby Hills. Didn't even know who the house used to belong to at first. All I had was a work order. Air quality assessment, post-incident cleanup, high-end property, tight schedule, no press allowed. When I pulled up the long curved driveway, past the quiet gates and empty hedges, the place didn't look wrecked or anything. It looked paused, like someone had pressed stop on a party halfway through. A man in a black polo met me at the door. Didn't give a name, just scanned my badge and told me to start in the lower levels. Said the top floors had been reset already. That was the word he used, reset. I thought that was weird. Anyway, the job was straightforward. I was supposed to inspect all vent lines, trace potential mold spots, and mark any units that needed disinfection. It was supposed to be routine, just another spoiled mansion that probably ran its AC non-stop and never changed filters. But when I stepped inside, the air was too clean. I mean, sterile, not the good kind either. It smelled like new drywall and bleach, like someone had been trying to scrub memories out of the walls. The first few rooms looked like hotel suites, minimal furniture, no personal stuff, and fresh paint that didn't match the original trim. I could still see lines where old pictures must have hung. In one hallway, the shadows of frames were burned into the paint like ghosts. I moved quick, got my readings, kept my gloves on, but the silence was heavy. No hum of background music, no signs of renovation noise, just that low kind of stillness that buildings get when they've seen something. Around mid-afternoon, I got to the pool grotto. It wasn't just a pool. It was a whole cave-looking setup with fake rocks and an underground passage you had to crouch to walk through. Whoever lived here had money, obviously, but it didn't feel fun. It felt like a set, like a place meant to pretend it was something else. There was a sealed vent hatch down there, behind a maintenance panel. It wasn't on the blueprint packet they gave me. That caught my eye. It was half covered in old dust, but the screws were fresh. I thought maybe someone had already inspected it and left it shut, but when I unscrewed it, the hinge popped like it hadn't been opened in years. Inside was just an empty duct, about 2 feet wide. Standard industrial-grade stuff, but something was wedged in there. Taped to the inside wall. It was a clear plastic folder, looked like the kind kids use for school reports. Duct tape all around the edges. I pulled it out with my multi-tool, careful not to rip it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in quarters. I opened it up and froze. It wasn't official blueprints, not really. It was a hand-drawn diagram of the estate, messy, uneven lines, but it matched what I'd seen, only it had more. There were red lines sketched under the house, through the wine cellar, past the studio wing, places the blueprint didn't even mention. One section was labeled, 4th floor, doesn't exist. Another had a red circle drawn over the tunnel near the pool with the words, "They still keep her drawing." My stomach nodded. I didn't know who her was. I didn't know if this was some prank or if someone left it on purpose. But the handwriting, it was shaky, like a kid's, or someone trying to write like one. And across the top, written over and over again in black pen, the same line repeated like a chant. "Tell the technician to fix the spiral." I stood there for a long time just holding that paper. The pool's filter system kicked on suddenly and made me jump. I stuffed the folder into my toolbox, slammed the hatch shut, and logged it as non-serviceable. I didn't mention the extra lines or the 4th floor that wasn't there. I didn't say anything to the guy in the black polo when I passed him on my way out. He didn't ask for a report anyway, just signed off and walked me to the gate. When I got home that night, my toolbox was still in the back seat. I brought it inside, figuring I'd look at the folder again in better light, but when I opened the case, the folder was gone. Not stolen, not misplaced, just gone. I turned the toolbox upside down, checked the seams. Nothing. That was the first moment I felt something crawl up my spine. I don't scare easy, but I felt it then. And that's when I saw the flash drive. It was sitting in the side pouch of my work vest. I didn't put it there. I never carry drives on jobs. It had no label, just a plain black thumb drive, dusty, scratched a little. I plugged it into my personal laptop. Stupidly, I know I should have used a burner or scanned it first, but something told me to just see. There was only one folder, named Ava_Air_3. Inside the folder were no documents, no videos, just one image, a scan of the same diagram I'd found in the vent. But this time, it was annotated further, more red lines, arrows pointing to something marked chamber under the west corridor. And in the top corner of the image, someone had drawn a spiral, rough, almost scratched into the page. I tried to zoom in. The resolution was high, but the more I stared at the spiral, the more it seemed to shift, not like an animation, more like my eyes couldn't hold still on it. I yanked the drive out and shut the laptop. I haven't told my supervisor, haven't mentioned the house again. But the weirdest part? When I checked my job logs the next day, the Diddy property wasn't listed. No work order, no invoice, no signature. Like I was never there. I still have the flash drive. I keep it in a drawer wrapped in foil. Laugh if you want. I know how it sounds. But every now and then, I swear I hear something faint in my apartment vents. Not words, not music, just that hum. That low humming, like someone in the walls is waiting for me to fix the spiral. Chapter 2. House of the Unnamed. I wasn't supposed to look that closely. We're trained for that in the task force. Read what's in front of you, don't imagine the rest. But sometimes the gaps speak louder than the files themselves. Sometimes it's the silences that scream. My name is Rosa. I'm not a field agent or a lawyer. I process data. Property logs, case evidence, digital residue. Whatever they dump into our system after a raid. I sit in a windowless floor beneath a federal building in Lower Manhattan, surrounded by other people like me, fingers ticking on keys, eyes bleary from screen glare. We don't ask questions. We document, tag, sort, archive, forget. The file I opened that day wasn't supposed to exist. It wasn't even in the main archive. It came from an evidence spillover batch from the Combs property raid. Batch D. Marked, restricted, tiered for internal classification. I only saw it because the metadata hadn't been locked yet. Someone had uploaded it manually and forgot to encrypt the alias tags. That's how it ended up on my queue. I clicked it thinking it'd be another guest log or service invoice. Most of them are. But the file had no subject name, just a title. Adopted Legacy Compliant Tier 3. At first I thought it was a mistake. No personal ID, no image, no case number, just an unstructured folder with scattered internal references, flight records, visitor logs, partial transcripts from encrypted texts. Some of the text was in shorthand I hadn't seen before. Phrases like, AB_initial cleared for 3B orientation. Matron recommends tunnel recall stimulus. Sketchbook memory degraded. Keep below. It was all so vague and coded, I almost closed it. But the phrase AB_initial stood out. It repeated just enough to mean something. A tag without a name. I ran it against the known roster of aliases from the raid and only got one match: Ava Baroni. Back in 2020, there had been viral videos of her, young girl, maybe 9 or 10, shown standing beside Diddy at a party. He called her my adopted daughter to the camera, smiling, saying she was part of the family. But there were never any legal filings, no paperwork, no transfer of guardianship, nothing. The mother, according to sealed notes, later denied giving consent, said she hadn't seen her daughter for weeks at that time, claimed it was just an appearance, nothing official. But the girl stayed at the property for over a year. Now here she was in a folder labeled Compliant Tier 3, not as a person, not even as a victim, as a classification. That's when my stomach started turning. I clicked deeper. One subfolder opened into a chat log, restored from a damaged phone recovered near the cellar tunnels. It was between an assistant and someone only referred to as the matron. The messages were all short. Assistant, she hesitated again during 2B. Matron, spiral too shallow. Use the sketchbook this time. Assistant, she's asking about her mother. Matron, remind her she's legacy, nothing more. Assistant, she drew the upstairs again. Matron, keep the sketchbook below, the memory must not climb. I stared at the screen for a long time. There was no mention of violence, no explicit threats, but that made it worse. It read like they were managing an inventory item, like the girl was part of some system and her drawings, her thoughts, were leaking into places they weren't meant to go. I tried searching for more references to legacy. The system gave me 27 hits, most connected to different cases of interest, but only one showed a new term: rehearsalite. I clicked into it, hoping for clarity. The file was corrupt. Half the characters were missing, just bits of phrases floating in blank space. Tonal control requires silence. His movements were nearly compliant. Spiral compliance dropped during drawing exercises. Loop resets every 8th attempt. I typed a manual query into the internal search bar. Rehearsal loop, Ava Baroni. My monitor blinked. The screen went black. No noise, no error code, just the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and my own breath in my ears. Then the screen flickered back on. Everything had closed. My tabs, my search logs, even the secure server window. The task queue had been refreshed. Only one word remained in the bottom left corner of my screen, typed into a blinking cursor like it was waiting for me to see it. Spiral. That's when I knew I had gone too far, but I couldn't stop looking. Something about that word spiral felt like it wasn't just a shape. It was a route, a structure, a way down. I pulled out my notebook and wrote it down. Not digitally, paper only, just in case. Back on the file menu, the Ava folder had disappeared. Not deleted, just no longer visible, like it had folded itself inward and taken its breadcrumbs with it. I opened my logs to confirm I wasn't imagining things, but the access history was already scrubbed. No record of what I'd viewed, no trace of the search query. It was like the entire session never happened. Still, I couldn't forget what I read. That word, legacy, that label, compliant tier 3, that voice in the messages, matron, that sketchbook being hidden below. They hadn't just taken Ava in and called her family. They turned her into a role, a designation, something to be rehearsed, controlled, forgotten when the spiral resets. I leaned back in my chair, the buzz of the office growing louder, everyone around me typing, clicking, unaware, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else had been watching when I accessed that file, like something on the other end had opened with me, not just for me. I didn't report it. I couldn't prove what I saw, couldn't explain why a child's sketchbook had access tags, or why legacy sounded less like a name and more like a function. But I wrote it all down, not because I think anyone will believe me, But because something about that word, spiral, feels like it's still turning. Like whatever happened to that girl is still happening. Like she drew something once, and that drawing is what they're trying to bury. And if they buried it down there, under tunnels, under floors that don't exist, then maybe it's still spinning. Maybe it's waiting for someone to follow the lines. Chapter 3. The girl in the recording. When they first called me for the job, I figured it'd be like the others. Clean some damaged audio from a raid, remove electrical noise, enhance voices, maybe boost room tones so the lawyers can argue over what happened in a hallway 3 years ago. That's what I do. I'm not a cop, I'm not a journalist. I don't care about headlines. I work with sound. They didn't tell me where the footage came from until I signed the NDA. Even then, it was only a case number, no name, no details. All I knew was that the files were flagged sensitive and had been pulled from a surveillance system at a private estate in California. They brought me into a rented office suite on the 32nd floor of some financial building that had no business being used for audio work. Blank walls. No art. No furniture except for a desk, a chair, and a server tower humming like a distant storm. The guy who handed me the drive didn't talk much, just placed it on the table and said focus on segment 89, A through 92C. Anything before or after is corrupted. Prioritize noise removal, but don't overwrite ambient anomalies. Ambient anomalies, that's not how we usually talk about audio problems. But I nodded and got to work. The files were rough, grainy footage, lots of signal distortion, interference patterns that looked like they came from power surges or magnetic tampering. The video was almost unusable, blurred, jumpy, with frames missing. But the audio was clearer than it should have been, especially in the wine cellar tunnel. I isolated the track, put on my studio headphones, and pressed play. At first, there was just silence, a deep, pressurized kind, like the air in the tunnel was pressing back against the mic. Then a low hum started, rhythmic, steady. Not a machine, though. It was human. A voice, almost like a child humming a melody with no real tune. The reverb told me the space was long, enclosed. Sound bouncing off stone or concrete. Then I heard footsteps, slow, dragging, not confident steps, like someone being led, or someone hesitating. Then the girl's voice, not crying, not yelling, just speaking, quiet, clear, like she was talking to herself. This isn't performance, this is the real practice. The room I was in got colder. I don't know how else to describe it. It was already air-conditioned, sure, but something changed in that moment, like the sound itself was pulling heat out of the air. I scrubbed back and played it again. Same phrase, same hum, same footsteps. Then I heard something I didn't notice before. A rustle. Soft, like paper moving. I ran a spectral filter to pull out the high-end frequencies, and there it was. Pages turning. Slowly. Deliberately. Then the girl again. Says the tunnel is where we don't have names. That's safer. He says I'm only Abba. Up there. I took my headphones off and sat back. My hands were shaking. I hadn't touched the gain levels, hadn't applied any reverb, but her voice was too close, like she'd whispered it right into the mic, even though I knew the camera was mounted on a wall. I kept listening. There was a sharp sun sound, like flesh meeting flesh, a slap. Then silence, but not the same silence from before. This one felt like it was listening. I was about to close the file when something else came through. Not in the waveform, not in the project timeline, not anywhere I could track or label. Different. It was just there. A whisper. Not recorded, not part of the file, but I heard it through the headphones when the audio was stopped, when everything was quiet. Grow them watching. I ripped the headphones off and stared at the screen. My software wasn't playing anything. The system wasn't even rendering sound at that moment. But I swear to God, I still heard it. Like it was inside the headphones. Like it had waited for the file to end. I checked the drive again. No malware. No ghost files. No hidden tracks. Just the segment and its corrupted neighbors. I played the girl's voice again, slower this time. Her tone didn't match the words. She wasn't scared. She wasn't angry. She sounded trained, like she was reciting something she'd memorized but didn't understand. Only Ava up there. That line hit me hard. It wasn't just a name, it was a boundary. Up there, she could be Ava. Down here, wherever here was, she was something else. Something without a name, without identity. Something that only existed when spoken about in silence. I opened my monitor log to check for prior edits. The system had a list of hashes for each file version. That's when I noticed something impossible. The log listed 6 prior edit attempts for segment 89A. I was the first person assigned to this job. I was the one contracted for the cleanup, and yet someone or something had accessed the audio before me. The comments on those logs were blank. No usernames, no timestamps. Just a single repeating phrase written under editor notes on all 6 prior entries. Spiral confirmed. Re-entry inadvisable. I didn't finish the job that day. I left the suite, took the elevator down, walked past the security desk without looking at anyone. I went home and unplugged everything in my apartment. My monitors, my Wi-Fi, even my fridge. That night, I dreamed in static. In the dream, I was in a tunnel. No light, no direction, just the sound of humming and the feeling that someone was watching me from behind a wall I couldn't see through. And when I woke up, I still had my headphones on, even though I swore I'd left them at the office. I checked my email the next morning. No follow-up from the client, no questions, no deadline extension, just one unread message with no subject line and no sender. It said, "This was not performance, this was the real practice." And attached was an image. It was a sketch. A girl, kneeling in a hallway, facing a wall covered in eyes, no pupils, just wide open circles staring out from brick. The girl held a pencil in one hand and the cord to a security camera in the other. Above her head, in looping handwriting, "Draw them watching." I never replied. I backed up the recording onto a drive and sealed it in a fireproof box. I haven't played it again. I won't. Because that voice, that whisper, it wasn't part of the footage. It was using the footage to find something, or someone. And I think it found me, the tunnel rehearsals. I don't remember walking into the room, but I remember the carpet, brown with blue threads, flat and tired, like it had heard too many secrets and held too many steps that wanted to go anywhere else. The lights hummed low overhead, the kind of hum you start to match your breathing to if you sit in one place too long. There was no window, just a table, 2 chairs, a bottle of water I didn't open, and the person sitting across from me, whoever they were, holding a pen that hadn't moved in several minutes. They didn't look at me like I was a child. Not exactly. They looked at me like I was something they hadn't seen before, but thought they were supposed to recognize. They asked me if I was ready to give my statement. I said, "I already have. You just didn't hear it yet." They pressed the red button on the recorder and nodded. I began talking. I said his name used to mean something different to me, not a name like other names. I never called him it out loud. He told me not to. He said the name up there, on the surface, was just a placeholder. "Call me what they need me to be," he told me once. "Down here, I'm something else." He never hit me. He never screamed. It wasn't like that. That would have been easier. That would have meant someone might have seen something. Instead, everything was quiet. Soft voices, piano music, smooth hallways. He liked things soft, easier to shape. There was a room below the wine racks, past the second tunnel bend. The first time I was taken there, I asked if it was a playroom. The woman walking with me, I think she was called the matron, smiled without showing her teeth. She said it was a place for rehearsal, a place for preparing before you perform. But I never performed, not in the way they said I would. There was no stage, no audience, just the walls and him and the books. The walls were always too close, not tight, just near, like the rooms were built to watch you while pretending not to. There were small windows sometimes near the top. I didn't ask who was behind them. I knew I wasn't supposed to. They gave me clothes, but they weren't mine. Dresses in colors I never picked, shoes with bows I didn't tie. I was told to sit, stand, turn, hold my face still. Softer chin, they'd say, less mouth. One of them taught me how to cry without letting my lips move. It makes them uncomfortable when you make sound, she whispered. I learned quickly. He said I was good at absorbing the shape of things. I didn't know what that meant until I realized he liked when I copied. He would show me pictures of girls in magazines and ask me to pose like them. He said it wasn't imitation, it was honoring. We draw through each other, he told me. Some people use ink, some use flesh, some use you. I wasn't allowed mirrors. He said mirrors bring names back. He said names were dangerous. I asked once if I could have one, just a little one, to brush my hair. He leaned down, real close, and whispered, "Do you want to remember, or do you want to stay safe?" I said I wanted to stay safe. After a while, I stopped wondering what I looked like. After a while, I forgot why I cared. I had a sketchbook. Not mine. Not at first. It was there when I arrived, mostly empty. The first page had 3 words written in crayon. Draw to remember. I didn't draw at first. I didn't think I was supposed to. But they kept placing it near me. On benches. On beds. On the floor by the door when I woke up. So I started using it. I drew the upstairs and they took that page away. I drew my mother once, I think. It's hard to remember now. I don't know if I was drawing her or remembering someone who used to be real. That page disappeared too. Eventually I learned what they wanted. I drew the tunnels, the rooms below. I drew myself sitting, standing, turning. I drew what I thought I was supposed to be. I got good at it. But then the drawings started to come back. One morning, the sketchbook had a page in it I didn't make. It showed me, but not as I remembered myself. I looked older, taller, and I was holding a pencil in the drawing. The caption at the bottom said, "She's almost ready." I didn't understand. I still don't. But after that, I stopped knowing whether I was the girl in the room or the drawing of the girl in the book. Because every time I turned a page, I saw something I hadn't drawn yet. And it kept coming true. The person across from me, whoever they were, shifted in their chair. I don't think they liked what I said. Maybe they didn't believe me. Maybe they were just trying to decide which parts could be used in court. But I wasn't finished. I reached into the folder they gave me and pulled out the torn page, the one I wasn't supposed to keep, the one I found tucked into the bottom of my pillowcase the day they moved me out. I slid it across the table. It was a drawing, not mine. It was the person sitting across from me, same posture, same eyes, same pen, mouth open, not blinking, watching. Above their head, scrawled in that same looping, impossible handwriting. She can only draw what she sees, but now she sees who's watching. I didn't say anything after that. I didn't need to. The room got even quieter, like the walls were listening again, like maybe they'd always been. I don't know if they'll use my testimony. I don't know if it matters. He said I was good at rehearsal, that I wasn't rehearsing, I was recording, and now you're part of it too. Chapter 5. Compliance Room, Tier 3. The motel room smelled like burnt coffee and Lysol, and the lock didn't really work, but I stayed anyway. I've stayed in worse. At least here the curtains were thick, and the guy at the front desk didn't ask for ID when I paid cash. I gave a fake name just in case, told him I was a mechanic passing through. He didn't care. I'd been sleeping with the lights on for a while, not because I was scared of the dark, but because I was scared of what I might see if it got too quiet. The dark back in that house wasn't the kind that comes from the sun going down. It was built into the walls. Down there, in the tunnels, the air didn't move right. The silence was planned. It was just a janitor. That's all I ever was. Hired through a third-party company, signed an NDA so thick I couldn't afford to even ask what I was cleaning most days. But you see things when you work the night shift. You hear things when you mop floors no one else walks on. The tunnels weren't on the blueprint. Not on the ones we were given, anyway. They told us it was a wine storage expansion. Said not to touch the west hallway. Don't unplug anything. Don't sweep past the red tape unless instructed. I didn't ask questions. Not back then. I needed the money. But little things started piling up. At first it was just the chalk. Tiny white symbols drawn near thresholds. Circles. Spirals. One time, I saw what looked like a child's drawing of a staircase with no bottom. I thought some kid had snuck in with a piece of chalk, maybe playing games. But then I saw one of the assistants walking past a mark, stop and erase it with her foot like she was trained to. That's when I realized the marks weren't accidents. Then came the rehearsals. That's what they called them, blackout rehearsals. I was told to prep the lower rooms once a week for performance readiness, but nothing ever happened down there that looked like performance. No music, no crew, just silence and the sound of soft footfalls. Sometimes I was told to plug in a speaker and play a looping track, a single piano note, repeating every few seconds. They said it was for ambiance compliance. I didn't know what that meant. There were buttons hidden around the tunnels, not labeled like emergency buttons. They were shaped like musical notes, quarter notes, eighth notes, etched into the metal of the tunnel rails. I found one behind a painting of a red hallway. When I pressed it, nothing happened that I could see, but the air changed, like a vacuum seal opening somewhere I couldn't reach. The girl, I didn't know her name at the time, was quiet, always quiet. She never looked directly at anyone unless they spoke to her first. She walked like she was afraid of echoing. One night, something went wrong. It was late, past midnight. I was sent down to sanitize the lower hall before Tier 3 reset. I didn't know what that meant. I thought maybe they had another event coming. But when I got down there, one of the panic buttons was flashing, slow, pulsing red. That had never happened before. Then I heard crying, not loud, not desperate, just quiet sobbing. I followed it to the wine freezer door. It was locked from the inside. That's when I heard her voice. She wasn't sobbing anymore. She was talking to herself, over and over. Don't draw the wrong door, don't draw the wrong door. I knocked, told her I was just there to clean, not to take her anywhere. She went silent. Then I heard the scrape of something, maybe the sketchbook on the floor. One of the assistants came down moments later. She didn't speak to me, just unlocked the freezer and walked in. The girl came out a minute later, holding nothing. Her hands were empty. But I swear when she passed me, she looked at me like I was part of something I didn't understand. Like I had a role I hadn't played yet. The next morning, I asked if I could be reassigned to another property. They said no. Said I was already cleared for Tier 3. A week later, the FBI raided the place. That was the last time I saw her. After that, I went into hiding. I didn't want to be subpoenaed, didn't want to be a name in some article. I thought if I just stayed quiet, it would pass. But it didn't. A month after the raid, I went back. Just once. I needed my last paycheck, figured the payroll office might still be open. The house was locked down, but the back gate had been left swinging, so I slipped in. It was empty, like a dream after you wake up. No furniture, no fixtures, just dust and paint lines where pictures used to be. I found my way back down to the tunnels. Don't ask why. Maybe I needed to see it again. Maybe I needed to convince myself it hadn't all been real. The tunnel lights still worked, dimmer than before. The piano speaker was gone. The chalk was washed away, but the freezer door was still there. Inside, the room was stripped. No sketchbook, no clothes, no trace of the girl. Except for one thing. A single page tacked to the wall with what looked like a silver hairpin. It was a drawing of me, sweeping. Same uniform, same mop, same lanyard badge. And underneath, in tiny, careful handwriting, "Act what you saw," but didn't say. I left without taking my paycheck. Since then, I've been here, in this motel, watching the news, listening to the quiet. I don't know if they're gonna come for me, but I keep thinking about what she said. Don't draw the wrong door. Think I already did. And now I don't know how to close it. Chapter 6. Testimony never entered. I don't know her. I never met her. I wasn't assigned to her case. That's the thing about working in redaction. You're kept at a distance. You're not supposed to feel anything when you black out a name or strike through a paragraph. You follow the protocol. You redact what the system flags. You delete what they call non-pertinent emotional distortion. They give it names so it feels less like erasure. But that night, nothing followed protocol. It was late. Most of the team had gone home. The lights in the archive basement were on motion sensors, and I'd been sitting still long enough for them to click off more than once. I was only staying behind because of the dump. That's what they called it. Emergency file dump. Code S, manual redaction only. That was rare. Normally we get digitals, PDFs with pre-tagged segments, but this time it was a physical packet, still warm from the courier's hand. I signed the clipboard without thinking. It was late. I wanted to go home. The folder was thick, gray, no seal, no case number, just a phrase embossed faintly on the front. Tier 3, internal compliance undetermined. Inside were typewritten transcripts, pages and pages of someone speaking, broken only by brief interjections from an unnamed interviewer. The heading on each sheet read, Subject, Baroni, A. Date, sealed testimony restricted level. Location, unlisted holding facility. I felt it immediately, the wrongness, the way the papers trembled a little when I touched them. Static, almost. The kind that runs through a room before lightning strikes. Still, I did my job. I sat at the desk, pulled out the black pen, and started to read. She talked about the downstairs practices. That's what they called it, a phrase she used like it was a subject in school. Only instead of learning to read or write, she was trained to disappear. Stillness. That was the first rule. She said they'd walk her into a room, tell her to sit, and then just leave. No timer, no instruction. Just the threat that movement was a test, and failure meant starting over. Sometimes they gave her props, flowers, a teacup, a book with blank pages. She was told to pose memory, whatever that meant, to show grief without emotion, to mime obedience. It was always said calmly, no screaming, just quiet repetition until her body listened more than her mind. She described how the rooms were graded. There were compliance scores, numbers posted on clipboards near each tunnel entrance. She learned that a 9 meant she was still too stiff. A 5 meant she was usable. A 3 meant she'd been seen. No one wanted to be seen. There was a corridor she mentioned more than once. Hallway M. She said it was narrower than the others and lined with black fabric walls that made every sound bounce. That's where she practiced smiling without teeth. That's where she learned to answer questions she wasn't asked. But the line that stopped me was this. When I didn't remember what he wanted, he'd ask me to describe the tunnel. And when I did, I became part of it again. I read that line 6 times, each time slower. The first time, I thought it was metaphor. The second time, I knew it wasn't. I put down the pen. I looked around the room, empty, still. I could hear the old elevator creaking down the hall, even though no one had called it. I kept reading. She said she wasn't punished like people imagine. There were no whips, no cuffs. Just silence, just long hours where she was told to wait for correction. She'd be placed in a room with one light, one stool, and a single camera facing the corner, told not to move until the door opened again. She never knew how long it would be. Sometimes minutes, sometimes hours. Once she said a day and a half. She stopped counting after that. Near the bottom of the packet was a sketch. It was rough, photocopied, but still detailed enough to make my stomach drop. It showed a room I recognized, a redaction station, the one I was sitting in. Same desk, same plastic water cup, same ceiling vent with the rust ring. And sitting at the desk was me, or someone that looked like me. They were holding a black pen. Their mouth was sewn shut, black thread pulled tight. Across the bottom of the page, in faint pencil, saw. Medical experience says, this mechanism is useless to measure cumulative answer section. That cannot escape the Taylor is considered to be constant. This damages a regulated met. That's one observed to be a victim-free motivation. The shred sucked. I dropped the page. My pulse hammered against the sides of my neck. I turned over the sketch, expecting to see a signature. There was none, just a circle, and inside it, a spiral. I reached for the tape recorder on the table, hit stop. Nothing happened. The button stayed red. It wouldn't click. I opened the folder again, fast now, flipping back through the pages. Every testimony entry was there, but I hadn't redacted a single word. I hadn't crossed out names, I hadn't tagged any language, I had just read. Sat, listened, absorbed. I had done exactly what she described. Impression. The screen on my terminal blinked. Then again. The lights flickered. Then the text appeared, typed into the blank line where I usually entered case IDs. This testimony was never meant for court. It was meant for rehearsal. Didn't know what that meant until I stood up. There was another page taped to the wall behind me. I hadn't noticed it before. It was a sketch of a tunnel, and in it, me again. Redacted. Mouth shut, eyes blank, erased into the process. I left the basement that night without submitting a report. I haven't returned. The court never called. No one asked about the dump. It was like the file never existed. But I kept one thing. A sketch, the first one, with the thread. Because when I look at it now, it doesn't feel like a drawing. It feels like a warning. And the worst part is, I think she was drawing it before she ever saw me. Like the tunnel was never under the house. Like it's wherever we stop asking questions. Chapter 7. The final drawing. I've typed a lot of stories into life. That's what I call it sometimes. What we do as stenographers. Courtroom minutes, testimonies, declarations, objections. They all pass through our fingers before they hit the record, before they become real in the eyes of the law. If you ask me, nothing's official until it's transcribed, until someone takes the noise and pins it down letter by letter. But what happened that day with Ava Baroni wasn't like any testimony I've ever taken. And I've sat through cartel trials, domestic terror cases, cult proceedings, ones where even the air in the room felt watched. But this was different. The courtroom was cold that morning, not just the AC. It felt like the light itself was dull, like someone had replaced the sun with something that didn't quite try as hard. Federal District Court, Room 11C. Security was tighter than usual. No press, no electronics, no sketch artists. Only the girl and the people who said they were ready to hear her. She took the stand with no fuss, no dramatics, just walked to the seat like she already knew where it was, like she'd been here before. It was already set up, machine in front of me, earpiece in, fingers poised. And she didn't look at anyone in the room. Not the judge, not the defense, not even the prosecutor. She just started speaking. She said it began the night they stopped calling her by her name. She said there was a final session, a tunnel rehearsal with no instructions, just a single phrase pinned to the wall when she entered the chamber. Draw us so we remember who we aren't. She said she didn't understand what it meant, not then, but she drew anyway. She drew shadows she didn't recognize, faces she'd never seen, and she never used his name, would walk in silently, pick up the sketches, and hold them to the light. Then he'd either smile or destroy them. He never struck me, she said, and my fingers typed it almost automatically. He struck the drawings. That was how he punished memory. He ripped the ones with faces. He burned the ones with exits. The ones where doors were drawn. The ones where Ava remembered escape. Those were the ones he hated most. Only draw what can't leave, he told her once. She said that was the rule. No clocks, no windows, no reflections. Only corridors and corners and people with no eyes. If she drew someone with eyes, he'd tear it up in front of her, told her she was inviting return. And return is not part of compliance. I was typing it all out, fast but steady, but then something strange happened. A line showed up on my screen before she said it. At first, I thought I'd accidentally hit a macro, but then it happened again. She was mid-sentence, talking about how they'd changed the tunnel shapes each week to confuse memory, and my machine typed, "You're watching the drawing, not the trial." I blinked. Ava hadn't said that. Not yet. But then, she did. A second later, word for word. I stopped typing for just a moment, my hands hovering. The judge didn't seem to notice. The attorneys didn't flinch. But Ava looked at me. Not long. Just enough. Like she knew what my screen had done. She kept talking. She said she once tried to draw herself holding a mirror, just to remember what her face used to look like. But when she turned the page the next day, the drawing had changed. The mirror was gone. She was holding a pencil instead. And behind her, someone else was drawing her. I glanced down again. The next line typed itself. She can't finish the drawing unless you write it. I felt something in my spine curl. I tried disconnecting the recorder, thinking maybe I'd picked up interference, but the screen stayed live, and the keys kept moving. I turned off the power strip, but the keys still moved. I looked up. Ava wasn't speaking anymore. She was staring directly at me. The judge asks her to continue. She said nothing, but the line typed anyway. This is not testimony, this is tracing. My breathing was sharp in my ears. I tried shutting the terminal. It didn't respond. The keys pressed again. One more sentence. You can't erase a drawing that already included you. Then Ava spoke. Out loud. Only once more. I don't remember which parts were mine. And then she stood, calmly, waited to be dismissed. The judge nodded. The session was over. But I kept sitting there. The screen was frozen on that last line. No new words, no crash report, just my reflection in the black glass, mouth slightly open. When I stood to leave, I noticed something taped under my seat. A folded piece of paper, old, smudged. It was a drawing of me. Hands on the stenograph, eyes wide, face sewn shut. The caption at the bottom, he drew the record, and the record drew her. They didn't submit the transcript. No one asked. No one even referenced her testimony after that. It was like it never happened. What I saw, and I know what I didn't type, is that machine doesn't glitch, and drawings don't come true, unless someone tells them to. Chapter 8. She wasn't the daughter, she was the tunnel. I didn't think they'd call me back. Not after what happened with the AB_initial file. Not after the metadata scramble, the search logs that disappeared mid-capture, the terminal that whispered spiral. I'd taken 2 weeks of sick leave, quietly, using the excuse of burnout. In our line of work, that was code for someone looked too hard. They let me go without questions. That's how you know it's real. But then came the envelope. No stamp, no seal, just left at my apartment door. Inside, one printed line. Return to Archive Level D. Finalize compliant asset 3BA. No signature, no contact, no option. I should have said no. Should have shredded it and taken the train west. But something in me had been restless ever since I accessed that original file. Ever since I read that she wasn't a person anymore. That she was a legacy. A tear. A drawing you couldn't unsee. So I went. The building was even emptier than usual. After-house access meant the overhead lights stayed off, unless you walked beneath them. It made the journey feel longer, each motion sensor clicking on like the building was waking up behind me. Archive Level D was colder than I remembered. Maybe they'd adjusted the system. Maybe it was always like that. But the chill wasn't HVAC. It was something else, like the air had memory. The finalization desk was cleared. The only thing waiting for me was a sealed plastic crate, labeled with a case number I recognized. Baroni. A testimonial materials sealed final integrity check. Inside were court files, reference sheets, digital transcriptions burned to disk, and one item not yet cataloged. A sketchbook. It was smaller than I expected. Brown leather cover. Frayed edges. Corners chewed, like it had been gripped too tight too many times. No lock. Just a thin red ribbon peeking out from somewhere near the back. I looked around the room, even though I knew I was alone. Then I opened it. The first few pages were empty. Then came the drawings, tunnels, faces without eyes, rooms shaped like lungs, page after page of compliance diagrams, positions, stillnesses, empty chairs, none of them labeled. Then came the courtroom. Not sketched like from a memory, but with an architectural precision, like she had measured the dimensions by eye. The judge, seated in profile, the empty defense chair, the vent in the ceiling that buzzed when it rained, even the carpet. Thread for thread, brown with blue lines. It was the courtroom exactly as I'd seen it the week she vanished. And in the corner, drawn faintly near the edge of the bench, was me, holding the sketchbook. I turned the page, breath catching. It was blank. Then it wasn't. Slowly, so slowly I thought I was imagining it, lines began to appear, like ink surfacing from beneath the page, like memory coming back up through the paper. She wasn't the daughter, she was the tunnel. We all walked through her to forget what we saw. I backed away from the table. My knees hit the edge of the metal bin. My hand still clutched the ribbon. The next page flipped itself. That's not a phrase I would have believed before all this. But that's what happened. No breeze, no movement, just the weight of it tipping into its own reveal. The drawing showed the courtroom again. Only this time, it was empty, except for one figure, seated at the table. Drawing, it was me. Only my hand wasn't holding the pencil. Someone else's hand was long, pale, fingers smudged with charcoal. Their sleeve was not my own. I slammed the book shut. The lights in the archive flickered. The server drive behind me whirred to life even though I hadn't touched the console. A single beep echoed from the central terminal. I turned. The screen had activated. It displayed a single sentence. Sketchbook uploaded. Compliance integrated. Memory compliant. And beneath that, final rendering pending. Awaiting scribe. That was me. I was the scribe. I wasn't supposed to read the files. I was supposed to copy them, to finalize them, to become the last layer of the drawing. The pen, the pencil, the hand. I looked back at the sketchbook. One final note had appeared on the inside cover. You wanted her to testify. I've seen it. Now it's your turn. The rest of the pages are blank, for now. But I know how this works. I'll write what I remember. I'll draw what I can't forget. And I won't stop until the spiral closes. If it ever does.